Leslie and Susie, and we're going to have a bit of a conversation around Leslie's installation piece called Share Table, and share a little bit of the context of the show that it was brought to life, I think, for maybe the second time, actually, for within Unveiled Prayers of the People here at Upper House. And I should point out right away, we have a bit of a like mini reimagined version of this piece,
I would say,
right to my left here. And there'll be some photos that you can follow along with on the slideshow behind us. But I just want to set the stage. So we're talking about this show, Unveiled Prayers of the People. And this emerged in winter 2021. So if you can remember where you were in 2020 and we're coming into this new year, there's a lot of anxiety still. We have not really been gathering much, even in person here at Upper House. And I, in kind of the curator's shoes for this show, I was like, how are we going to bring people together? What is it going to take for us to come out of our homes, to want to be really proximate with one another? And I just had this sense, while we host a number of remarkable lectures and thinkers here, that it wasn't going to be a single person talking on the stage that was going to bring people out. And immediately my passion area and what my mind was drawn to was the arts. The arts bring people together. There's something about honoring that inner affections and just the multimodal, multi-sensory experience of the arts that I thought we need to do something with the arts. And I also felt like prayer was a big piece of this as well. And so I started with these kind of abstract ideas of how are we going to bring people together? I think we need to put together a show. And so we ended up curating existing pieces that represented prayers of several artists. I think there were about 10 or 11 people involved. And yet I knew, okay, I don't want this just to be something that someone comes through and consumes and has, again, an individual experience and they just go home. And we don't know about it, or there's no interaction that happens. And Leslie and I had worked on a show or a collaborative piece, Hold Fast, when we did that performance here. And I thought, you know who I need to get involved is Leslie. Like Leslie's work sets the table literally for people to interact and collaborate. And just the way your mind works is like always about connections. I love the way your mind works. And so I thought, I'm going to share this idea with Leslie and see, would she have something, an existing piece of work? I think we had like maybe 2, max 3 months, like lead up. Like this was like an idea going, I think this spring people are going to be ready to come out of their homes and we should have something. Do you have any work? And I called her like that would you be willing to recraft something even out of something in your studio? Like, do you resonate with this idea? So we started super raw. And maybe you want to just talk about that conversation or where that
was interesting. I really loved being invited in. I think one of the themes, I think, for the work that I love to create is how to bring invitation. How do you invite people in different ways to experience your work and be part of the process and not just be a one-way kind of watcher in a way or observer. And I had done a show when I arrived in Madison area about 2013 with Barry Sherbeck and Betsy Delzer. I think Barry's running around with the camera. And it was called Belonging. And I set a table that was Share Table. It was in this sort of realm. But it was, and I thought, you know what? When Melissa was talking to me, I thought, I always wanted to do that again. I wanted it to have people. I wanted it to be something that was not just in storage, And so it's like, when people say, oh, keep it for don't throw that away. Keep it for some good time. And my mom would have been so proud that I actually remembered that I did the art project and brought it out of retirement to an extent. And so I just love that you asked. And what I found was working with Melissa to craft it took a lot of the weight off. We were, in our family going through some very, very difficult health things like most people. And it was just really, really tough to figure out how is this going to even happen. Yeah. So it was a very collaborative effort. And if you can see some images there, I don't know, I don't want to, if you had some things to add.
No,
but
please.
I think there's 27 place settings. And I think I did scour quite a few thrift shops, as you heard earlier, about like some chairs. And then I asked, there's probably people in here that donated chairs for that time period. And I didn't want things to all feel like they had to be the same. Everyone comes to the table with different things, what you bring and how you sit and how you are. And part of it was even, and during a break, if you wanted to come up and take a look at the table or kind of just see, but it was really about, how do we have a conversation? How do we be at a table, not necessarily with food, but food for thought, food that feeds you in a deeper sense, even than bread, so that was part of that. And it was just a really wonderful collaborative time to have people from the community. And then I remember had to make several more of these bags and think about, how do people interact with this piece? And so we can come back to
I'm going to describe, I would like to know actually how many people attended the Unveiled exhibit. So a lot of you had an experience, or at least half of you. So let me just fill in a couple practical gaps. I came into this space here. Cam hand-built walls, if you didn't know that, for the show. Very collaborative. And so we had like a gallery sort of set up. We had an accompanying set of prayers that people would walk through, and they would pray these prayers with the pieces. And as you went around the room, you eventually came to the stage. And so that's the photos you're seeing, where this entire stage was several tables connected together with this table. And this became a participation. And so you came up and you sat at one of these chairs, and there were these yellow note cards, and you wrote down a prayer. And it was a way for us to kind of capture what was happening in the community at that time. What was happening individually, what was happening corporately. We knew that so many people had so many really profound experiences that were really hard, involved a lot of loss, a lot of isolation. And so how do we give voice to that?
Yeah.
And so Leslie's piece set the table for that. So people wrote out these prayers, and they would put them in the bags that just had these really even mundane word prompts, right? And so all the bags say share, I think, on one side. But then the opposite side of the bag, it just has these, like you see home, just a random
tomato.
Yeah. Lunch, tool.
Credit.
Yeah. That might prompt someone to reflect or to write a prayer. And so Susie, you were one of the people that came through. You're an artist yourself as well. But tell us a little bit about your experience, or just, your role in. Yeah.
I mean, the connection I make today, even just watching the video between Tish and Marcia, is thinking about the word encouragement and realizing that the word courage, I'm sure it's the same root. I don't know if there are Latin people out here, people who know Latin, but I'm guessing it's the same root. I had many people approaching me Zooming me or calling me and saying, well, you're a writer and now you're locked down in your house. You must be having a great time writing, right? Because now you have no distractions. Well, I'll say that people like me, I know many writers who could not write at all during the pandemic. And were doing all of the kinds of things we were doing, like watching Netflix and, scrolling through your phone. And sadly, many people, moving toward different kinds of addictions, that being in that place of isolation and being in that place of, I think, fear and discouragement was not actually helpful for art. I think it was hard on the artists in our midst. So I think, I don't know how many of you out here are actually artists and how many of you experience that, but I know many writers who experienced a paralysis, could not write. And to be honest, practically speaking, when I do experience certain kinds of writer's block, one of the things that really helps me is to go to a museum and to engage with different forms of art. And museums were closed. There was no, you could not do that. So when I heard about the show that was happening here at Upper House, I signed up right away. They had sign-ups so that they could, keep the numbers sane, because I think there was such a demand, there was such a hunger to re-engage with art on some level. Yeah. So I signed up with a group from my church. So that was an interesting aspect of this show, that many of us came through the show in our church communities. I think in engaging with the table as it was set, especially that last piece that Leslie had put together at the end, just captured a longing that we all had. We all miss being able to sit around a long table and hang out with each other and eat and spittle while we're eating and laughing and not be paranoid and not be terrified of the fact that we're going to kill somebody, right? I mean, that was the fear that was put over people, the fear that, you know, a child will kill a grandchild, you know, or a teacher, or, you know, we're going to spread this and we're going to hurt people. And that kind of fear was palpable. I remember walking through Trader Joe's the first time I had to go shopping with my mask, and everyone walking around like zombies, pushing their carts. I don't know if you remember that, your first experience of going back into some form of public. And I felt nauseated. I mean, I could feel everyone else's anxiety. People were not talking. They were not making eye contact. So, you know, this is what we had lived through. And fear was something that kept artists from doing their work. I think fear was something that kept people from living lives they wanted to live. And so re-engaging with this art it confronted that fear. Because I'm a sci-fi writer, I have to, of course, mention Dune. And how many of you have read the novel Dune or seen the film? Yeah, there's a few of you out there. And do you know the Bene Gesserit litany against fear, the first lines? It's not exactly biblical, but Frank Herbert is capturing something of how we experience fear and what it does to us. So the Bene Gesserit litany on fear is, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it is gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. That's the part that I think is theologically, you know, off. But at the same time, I think that Frank Herbert understands that the fear we were living under did something to our brains. It did something to our communities that was somewhat destructive. And re-engaging with art is something that brought us back into the place of courage and brought us back into the place of community. And that, I think, is how a lot of my community from my church, as we went through the prayers of the people together, that's how we experienced it.
I keep wanting to make sure I don't forget to say something, so I want to say it before it's the end and I throw it in.
No, you're great.
But I think one of the things that I think the role of an artist, and I think the role of art, like what Susie was saying, like going to museum, I can really connect in a way when I go to a museum. And I think that this is art, you know, we have between friends, right? Like let the art speak between friends. I think art often is the place of between. And I think to keep this in mind, right? Like making an art is between friends, and the art also can befriend you and can communicate in a way that maybe you can't. Maybe the art is an interface. You know, I also think artists, we function as like intercessor type people. And I think it's like, I love that part of the idea of on earth as it is in heaven. Like, give us this day, you know, our daily bread. And the idea of that, you know, let it be on earth as it is in heaven. Let us not be fearful. Let us be in that in-between space together, you know, and art. And when I'm creating art, I also feel like I'm not just creating it. There's like a parallel play, right? There's things happening here and there's things happening here, and it's happening at the same time. There's the unseen and the seen. And if we can tap into that, I think there's a lot of encouragement. And so this piece, I feel that it was kind of representing the idea of a feast in heaven and a feast, you know, and the idea of, we were kind of talking, it was funny, you know, like biblically there's a lot of eating going on, feasting and gardening. And I thought about, you know, we talked about like farm to table, you know, there's like garden to table, you know, how it was like, you think about the Garden of Eden and then the table at the end of Revelation, like the wedding feast. And this idea that there's opportunities in art to bring heaven down, or bring us up to heaven and bring us to a place that is a place where you can have perspective.
It's like a portal.
Yeah. You know, sometimes you're like, ooh, I'm just in that zone. And anyway, I just wanted to share that. I think between friends, I just want to press into this idea that art can be a friend too. And art is a betweenness for friendship. How often do you not agree with someone, But when you look at a piece of art together, there's this place of, oh, we can be together because we're enjoying this together.
Yeah.
And I think the togetherness is really, kind of comes back. I don't know who had that quote, but there was some quote about that. Like, we don't have to always come to the same conclusions, but we can be at the table together, I think, often through art.
Yeah. So well said. Leslie, I just want to say something I loved about working with you and working on this piece and how you think as an artist is your mind is always making connections. You have like a clear vision, but you're also, I feel like, just attuned to as you just described, like the betweenness that's happening in and amongst your work with the materials, with the person and the work. And I just feel like that is an inspiration to other forms of art too, just recognizing not just the original vision you had as an artist, but how is it setting a table for an interaction and experience that someone is having, and they're bringing what they have to the work,
right.
and then they're engaging with it. And I just see you being so open-handed as an artist to, you're committed to that vision, but then you're like open to what is God going to do with this piece, and highlighting the different themes and connections that come from it that are even beyond what you saw originally. Something I also want to share that many people might not know unless you were one of the artists in the show is for this show, we actually did a closing ceremony. So often there's an opening ceremony or an open house at the beginning of a show. But as I was thinking about, okay, people are coming in with their church communities individually during the day. We had several open houses where people signed up to come. I thought, all these prayers are getting collected in these bags. And yes, they're prayed, by the individual voice, and they're submitted in. But I thought these prayers need to be prayed. Like, how do we come alongside and be a community and kind of sew together these individual voices? And so we brought together the 11 artists that were a part of the show, and we had a closing ceremony where we shared some food together, but then we all sat at the table. Yeah. And I believe we each chose like one or two bags, and we had this time of silence where each of us took out all of the prayers and individually read through all of them. And we wanted to also be able to voice some of those. And so each artist chose one or two prayers that they wanted to speak out loud. And so then we, in a semi like performative piece, but it was such a
intimate.
It was so intimate. It was so holy, giving voice to a prayer that was written during this show. And we just went around and all read. And the photo behind us doesn't show, but we had projected clouds that were on the screens. And so there's this sense of like joining the cloud of witnesses and resonating with heaven, and how heaven like echoes our prayers, and how, Jesus is advocating for us, with the Father. And it was just so reverent, and really was another part of the piece, like another layer that had really powerful impact.
No, I just love the idea that people were, invited. I mean, it is holy to read someone else's mail prayer, and I have been housing these prayers, and I don't really know always what to do. So I'm glad we're here today. And
some things you don't throw away.
Yeah, you just I know they're there. So I had something to say.
That's okay.
Can't think of it right now.
I don't know if any of us have like a closing thought on betweenness,
yes.
but I don't know, something that really mattered to me in this piece that I think was successful, if you will, was setting this table for using the arts, but to invite, if I can say, non-artists to the table as an avenue. That's something I'm just passionate about in more of a curator perspective, to say like the arts aren't just like up on this holy hill and it's an untouchable experience, or that there's a way for you actually to partake, and you don't have to think of yourself as an artist to actually be a part of the art, which Craig set us up thinking about all these different roles that are involved in the arts. And so I'm even just encouraged in that, going like, oh wow, like you were so open to work with me with this raw idea of like, Leslie, would you be open to collaborating? And it was just I think it was a gift to the broader community to be able to step into that.
Yeah, and it grows. I mean, I think, art never happens on its own. And it was just really wonderful to have these discussions. And we would just have these burgeoning discussions over the course of however many months. And I see people here that brought chairs. I see people who came, and it's just lovely.
Your courage, you fed off each other's courage.
Yeah.
And you encouraged each other.
Yeah. And I think people, and if you make something, it's like if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? If art is never enjoyed, does it get to do what it's created to do?
Yeah.
You know?
That's good.
So,
Thank you all.
yeah, thank you.